onto the banking at Daytona in the 1981 Daytona 24 Hours in a Porsche 924 GTP to highlight the start of the next phase of Al Holbert's career. It's a foggy morning in Daytona as we come to the green. My Porsche 924 GTP is woefully underpowered compared to the other Group 4 machines in this class. Whatever I can snatch from these guys at the start will be a fight to hang on to. I added some vintage touring cars from the early 70s to give me somebody to race with a little later in the race. Daytona in these years was often a mismatch of retired GT racers put back into service by privateers, so it's not too unrealistic. Now these M1s are just gonna rocket away from me here. I am the bread, or I am the meat in M1 bread. I didn't honestly know the Porsche 924 existed until I saw it in Project Cars 2. Didn't even know it factored in Al Holbert's career until I saw a picture of Al driving one at Le Mans in 1980. This car got the 924 got a significant amount of push from Porsche since it's been a couple times now where Porsche has tried to reduce the dependence on the 911. Back then it was with these front engine rear drive platforms. They did it, tried again with the 928. But the 924 was going to be the race car. Unfortunately, in this version, it's got a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, good for about 360, 365 horsepower. The cars it's racing against here have in the 400s. It's a light car, 2,000 pounds, a little over 2,000 pounds. So it goes through corners pretty well. But in 1980, Al Holbert was teamed up with Derek Bell for the first time in a factory entry at Le Mans. I honestly forget how the car did at Le Mans, but it wasn't going to win overall in 1980 or 1981 when it raced again. Al did develop this car a little bit and attempted to race it in the Trans Am series in the States. The engine was eventually bored out to 2.5 liters. Still made it a little bit of an underdog in most classes. When I saw this car, I'm gonna let this Ferrari by. When I saw this car in the roster for Project Cars, I always wanted to make a video about it because it was one of those cars that highlighted the unique content that Project Cars had. That it was the start of Al's factory efforts with Porsche makes it a little bit more significant and meaningful for this video. So while the 924 GTP didn't really set the world on fire, particularly for Al and Porsche, it did seem to solidify the relationship between the factory and Holbert Racing. So when things like the 956 was relatively new, but it was not a lot, in particular in 1982-83, the 956 was not eligible to race in IMSA because of safety rules and where the driver's feet passed the front wheels. So Holbert Racing was involved in getting the 956 turned into the 962, which obviously was a really important car in the GTP era of IMSA. And of course, Al did achieve two more championships, I should say, in the version of his 962. His 962s were always somewhat unique from the other customer cars. And eventually you would see some of the improvements from Al's car filter down to the other customers, such as things like where they place the intercooler for the Porsche Turbo. And of course, the 962 carried Al to his 3 Le Mans victories. Can't seem to make any headwinds on these guys. But they're not blowing by me either. Al's position at Porsche, essentially he was the director of Porsche Motorsports North America, and one thing Al really wanted to do was to start a Porsche IndyCar program. So I mentioned in part 1 of this series how Al achieved a 4th place in the Indy 500 in 1984, and he did a couple other races that year in IndyCar. And this was most likely fact-finding for a possible Porsche program, which did come to fruition. At first, Porsche was hell-bent on building their own chassis and engine. And that was just a little too ambitious. And eventually they switched to, I think, the March chassis, which was very effective in IndyCar racing in the late 80s. And stuck the turbo Porsche in the back. Unfortunately, with Al's passing in 1988 from a plane crash that he was piloting, Holbert Racing closed immediately, which shuttered the sports car team and the GTP team, but it also ended the real creative impetus behind the IndyCar program, and I believe it made it through the 90 season and then petered out. I think if Al Holbert had an analog, I can't believe I'm reeling this guy in. If Al Holbert had an analog in racing, would have to be Dan Gurney. Dan was a ferocious competitor on the track. But he was also a builder, like a genuine builder of organizations. You look at AAR is still around building things for the government and defense contractors. That could have been a future for Holbert Racing, given their technical abilities and Al's drive. But Al was also a ferocious driver on the track and a brilliant mind in developing the car. When he died, he had shown Derek Bell a prototype of what could have been the 963, or not necessarily called the 963, but the successor to the 962. While we were fortunate to have a nice long career with Dan Gurney, we didn't get the same with Al. We almost lost Al to stock car racing in the late 70s as well. He had some rides with Junie Dunleavy. Didn't get the success that he probably would have liked to motivate him further. But stock cars lost as sports cars win. I did a test race in this 924 at Zolder, which is a nice, twisty, typical European circuit. And when I came out of the pits, I was like, this car cannot do anything well. It doesn't accelerate. It doesn't steer. It barely brakes. But after about 3 laps, the car just absolutely comes alive. This is a really fun car to drive, but more importantly, it's a fun car to race. Car has horrible turbo lag. But on this track, the way you're accelerating very early in these hairpins, the turbo lag is mitigated. Like, I'm already on the boost. I'm like at 75% boost all the way around the corner, which helps. At a track like Zolder, I was actually having to 2-foot brake it so that I could keep the turbo boost pressure up through slow corners. Otherwise, the lag coming out the corners was just brutal. But this car reminds me of what Simbin was so good at, and that was making a car that wasn't always on the knife edge, but it was a car that, you know, like, okay, I got out of shape here, I'll probably lose a position. But you can really lean on these cars. Like, I still play GTR 2. Mostly because you can push these cars, you can brake them hard, you can be a little bit more rugged with the inputs. And you can still be competitive. You're not so on the knife edge that the slightest contact with another car or the slightest error will send you spinning off into the grass. And it makes races like this possible. Ooh, try a little bump and run. See if Al learned anything from NASCAR. In 1981, this car actually failed to finish. So I figure any positive momentum in class is a win. Ooh, and I think I'm actually ahead of a Ferrari too. Al was teamed up with Rick Mears, which is pretty cool, and Doc Bundy. Doc was kind of finding his feet at that point. He was a pretty good amateur racer when amateur racing was very close to professional. Went on to become I believe he was a factory Corvette GTP driver when that program was in full swing. Be nice if I could get that place back. Lighter car helps here, but that oversteer doesn't help. One of my favorite things in sim racing is driving these historic GT cars. The Monza from the first video is a good example. This 924 is kind of more fun than driving a 962 or a Can-Am car. Ooh, yeah. I just knocked that guy off track. He will not be happy. So another notable thing about Al's career is he won 5 IMSA titles with 3 different cars. Like a lot of times you see some dominance in one car. You look at Tom Christensen's Le Mans record, primarily Audi, that 1 year with Bentley, which was an Audi product. You look at Al's career, he dragged that Chevy Monza to be a championship winning car. In 1983, he had a March GTP car that he shoehorned a Porsche engine into the back, turned that into a championship winning car. And of course, later on, when he got his hands on the 962, parlayed that into 2 IMSA championships. Really quite a record. Testament to his effectiveness, both on the track and in the garage. This Ferrari's gonna make a move here. Whew. I'll take that as a win among those competitors. And with that, that ends my run as Al Holbert. Thank you, Al.